After finishing the season trophyless for the first time since 2016-17, which is outrageous, isn't it?
Low key. Like, I know lots of people have no interest in City as such, but if I look at this like objectively, that highlights how good they've actually been.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I mean?
Of course. And
people
don't
want, but like that's a concept that's nutty. Yeah,
and maybe to the point of VAR, I don't want to accept that it's making the game better, and it probably is overall. For me, it's just all that matters. All that matters is the ball crossing the line and getting on with it.
Yeah.
And I think with Man City, people don't want to give them their flowers in terms of the football that they played and therefore the trophies that come. But yeah, I mean, the fact that I believe that. The fact that it's 2016-17, I'm going, that makes complete sense. There's not been a trophy won there. It just shows how brilliant they've been.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to be interesting here because they have a big summer ahead of them to put things right. Man City finished just 71 points.
I know. Listen to how we talk about
with
it
a great end to the season, really, overall, obviously not the FA Cup final.
Yeah.
But that's 20 points off from last season. Only Tottenham have a bigger points difference to last season.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is kind of have a look at some of the bits that went wrong, what were the ripple effects of those, what's the truth about those when we get to the end of the season, and also kind of how can it be fixed a little bit. And of course, Nedum is with me, which is wonderful. It's been far too long, so it's good to see you, mate.
Yeah, it's good to see you. And because we're talking about City, people think I'm going to go into full life, flipping Blue City, whatever. Like, and to a certain extent, like their fortunes do matter to me. But I'm going to try and talk about this as fairly as possible.
Yeah, no, but that's why we wanted to talk to you about it, because I think actually, two sides of it. One, just the sort of pile on Man City is not actually like interesting or productive, really. So it's kind of
fun.
balanced
It's fun
between,
for people, though.
Yeah,
it's fun for a lot of people.
Certainly this season. And look, any team needs to sort of get knocked off their perch every so often. Like I put out my reactions to my Premier League predictions, and I said, Man City to win the league. We know what they are. We know what they're going to do. They're going to get 90 points. And they didn't. And that's great.
Yeah.
Like, broadly.
Yeah.
Right? That's a great thing that, like, teams don't just be brilliant forever.
In regards to this, to go back to predictions, and I've got to say for, like, everybody, like, listening, watching, and so on, like, that predictions section of the season is the worst part for me. It is horrendous just because, like, we're at this exact moment in time where we don't know what's going to happen next. But we're meant to predict 10 months worth of football.
Welcome to digital content.
Oh my gosh, it's genuinely horrendous, and it's because like
something that everyone can have an opinion on that no one can be wrong on.
Exactly.
Yet,
because
it's perfect.
Because I saw something recently. In fact, it was probably a couple of months ago, where some of my friends who support Liverpool, they're sending me links to things about how nobody at the BBC said that Liverpool were going to win the league and so on.
Right.
But then I said to him, "Did you believe Liverpool were going to win the league at the start of the season?" He said, "No."
No.
So like, what are you talking about then?
Yeah.
But it's so hard to predict, and also like. You can't win because you'll always be wrong on something.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks, not everyone, but a lot of people think there's an agenda against your club now.
But you know, I really like, it's funny, with the predictions, I do it in a different way to other people. Other people seem to look through their table and go, that. I go back and what did I say?
Okay.
And what bits some bits I got right, less so this year than last year. Some bits you get totally wrong. And I think that's where the interesting bit is to go, was I wrong in putting forward, like Forest, I went, there's a group there, but it's got to be this year. I've got to see something this year.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you've got a lot of players with pedigree that, you know, aren't showing it properly. And they did show it.
Yeah.
So I think, and to the point with Man City, it's one where, you know, not to sort of flog a Champions League horse, but like, that fact that there are a 20-point drop-off of where we expect you to be, I think where you would probably expect yourselves to be, that means that there is something, you know, there's meat on the bone here to sort of pick at. If you know what I mean.
Absolutely. There's, I don't know how exactly you want to do it, but one thing that's been really valuable this season from a Manchester City perspective, and not necessarily for others, because, you know, the fluctuations have been probably more steady in some ways. For City, if you split the season into three, you see three different teams. Because it was the middle third of the season where they lost 6 games in a row, where the points were a mess, where they were heading in the wrong direction.
13 fit players, you were saying, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that middle third of the season is very, very significant to show how bad things were, but also in that time is when you can have a look at their squad overall and realise, like, those 13 fit players weren't necessarily the 13 that you'd be seeing starting a lot of football anyway.
And haven't they won, like, didn't they win 10 the last 12 or something like that as well?
Yeah.
Like, so there's been some there's been overall improvements, but there's so many different ingredients of context that you can enlighten me on in terms of if you believe in these things or not. Like, for example, what do you think about why Man City's finished so strong, kind of more so this season, but generally every season they always finish the season really, really strong, and there's always talk about being on the beach and all those different things. Like,
Yeah.
what do you how do you feel about that as an ex-player, this beach stuff?
I've got to say, by the way, the beach stuff is really, really interesting. And I think we're going to speak on behalf of the vast majority of professionals here, yeah? But say from November through to March is probably the toughest time of the season because all these international spots are now gone. You're playing 3 games a week. Weather's horrendous. You know, your body's starting to hurt, all this stuff. And you start looking forward towards the end of the season because it is actually nice to look forward to a break.
I know what you mean, yeah.
So, people, you probably find it in this industry as well because you're not playing, but you're talking about it every single week. Every match day, you've got some involvement in.
Yeah.
So, you do start planning things like holidays because not everybody can afford to just, when the season ends, say, right, this is what we're going to do. You've got family, you've got potentially wives, all this stuff.
Even the sun coming out, the games have a different feeling, don't they?
100%.
Like totally. Once you see you start seeing more like with QPR, you see more QPR shirts because people are taking their coat off.
Yeah, vibes change throughout the season. Vibes change. So teams aren't necessarily on the beach, but they can have other things that they're thinking about. And obviously, you want to be playing for something in the back half of the season anyway.
I guess their future as well, right?
100%. Because again, there's so much context around football. There's so much nuance, rather, because some people are running out of contract. Some people are in the process of negotiating a new one. Some people know they're leaving. Some people know that they're staying. But now you all have to come together as a collective to try and solve the problems of the season. I think for City, throughout the other years, so one thing that Guardiola was good at doing, and he was good at this to a certain extent this season because of the Euros just gone, he doesn't rush people back.
Yeah.
So in the Community Shield against United in August, I remember Mainu was playing for United. But for City, Kyle Walker, John Stones, Phil Foden, possibly one more, I forget who it was, they hadn't even started pre-season yet. And the plan is for him is to build and build and build so that in that last third of the season, last half of the season, they're ready to go.
Firing, yeah.
They're flowing fitness-wise, mentality-wise, they're good to go. Whereas I think other managers, you think of it this way, would you rather have a team that does well at the start but finishes strong, or a team that does really well at the start and you're worried they're going to run out of steam at the end?
Yeah.
So I think he prefers to spin it that way. And then this year, that middle of the third of the season, so many players were unavailable that I think for the first time in a while, and other managers have obviously faced this because you can essentially be defined by injury crises at the time. When we saw what Bournemouth were doing until they weren't doing anymore.
Yeah, totally. Injuries matter.
Like a manager and someone like Guardiola, he actually makes 3 or 4 changes for every game whenever he can. Yeah. And it's not so obvious that you think he's struggling or whatever. But because again, this is based around maybe having 16 players that he wants to be involved. But he can pick a team that he thinks is right for the game of football, because every game of football could be different. Is this team good in transition? Are they a team that likes to drop off? Is it a low block, mid block, high block, so on and so forth? Mm-hmm. And he got to a point where in that season, he could just pick whoever was available. And some of the people that were available probably didn't suit the plan that he wanted. Mm-hmm. Like to mention, there's a youngster for City who's just won, I'm not sure if it's PL2 Player of the Year or something in the under 18s. Jemiah Simpson-Poussey.
Yep.
Centre back. A year ago, he's lifting the youth cup for City. That middle third of the season, he's starting in the Champions League against Victor Gyökeres. He's starting away at Brighton and stuff. I think he's got potential to play for City in the future, but he had to play for City in that moment. Yeah. Because at that time, all the centre backs were unavailable. And I remember it was Akanji and Ake were both unfit, but still one of them had to play alongside him to try and give him experience. Pep Guardiola had no intention of playing that team.
Right.
This season, Rico Lewis has had ups and downs.
Not at that point in the season, right?
No,
you say, if you're in your May, the season's done, you've won it, then you start seeing these kids.
Exactly, yeah. And the kids can be. And he's a good player. He's a good player. We start in big games for City, and you think about City's strength in years gone by. They've got international centre backs everywhere. Ake, Akanji, Diaz, Stones, they're the 4.
But even players like Taylor Howard-Bellis, players that they've got so many players that have had to leave Man City to kind of get those minutes.
Because that defensive side is solid.
And also, I was talking to someone this morning. My mate Flav was talking to a guy who used to be at MK Dons, and he was talking about. He was like the difference between under 18 football and just full stop League 2, let's say, men's football. It's just a totally different sport. Yeah. So to go up to to Champions League football.
Yeah.
And then also, I guess the thing that's I think important to say with Man City specifically is, regardless of injuries, you will not be given sympathy by anyone.
No,
If anything, it's like the first time we've kind of smelt blood with Man City.
Yeah.
So that's hard to step
100%.
into.
And like football at times, like the phrase is like zero sum. One gain is one negative, yeah. So for example, when you see a team that's been defensively really, really good and they start to ship a few goals, before you know it, the defense might have less belief, but the opposition gains some.
Right.
So they start playing you in a different way now. They start committing more bodies forward. Managers start believing in things. And so they start doing things in a certain manner. Like from when we were younger, you'd go to Old Trafford to basically just enjoy the stadium. In the last few years, people are going up there with a genuine belief that they're going to win.
Totally.
And you can hear it in the crowd.
You smell it. Yeah.
You know what I mean? The players for United at times can sense that this is happening again. Whereas historically, that wasn't a thing. You know what I mean? Like,
and that's been, look, since 2016-17, that's been Man City.
100%. And like I say, so the back half of the season, I think he makes a long-term plan for those players to get them ready and fit and firing for that point to where they can crack on, and they manage situations and games so well. And I think in that middle third, they lost their strength, which was the ability to like close games out, because there's no lead that City would have in that spell, which would be safe in the last 10, 15 minutes of the game. Come the back half of this season, the way that they counter-press sides who are trying to hit them in transition, the way they manage moments, the way that they can move the ball around is like, City could be 1 or 2-0 up, and the opposition are frustrated because they can't get the ball. Time's gone by, the little mistakes, there were so many mistakes every single week that were leading to goals.
Yeah.
So people now start believing, well, if we put them under pressure, the mistakes will be there. Well, who's going to be tracking back in midfield? There's nobody there. Like, as good as he has been for City in his career, like Kyle Walker had his worst 6 months that we've probably seen in his entire career. And that's as captain.
Yeah.
And to put a conversation out there, how tough is it to lead a team when you yourself are not playing to the standards that you hope to be able to play in a time which is as tough for the team as you could imagine? Because you need to lead by example. But what's the example?
Yeah, it's not a good look, is it? And I think also, like, I think with Man City as well, it was, I think about the Liverpool game.
Which one?
The first one, I think. I mean, both were pretty brutal.
Yeah.
It was just, I was sort of looking at, you're looking at the profiles of the team, the energy in that team, and it was sort of it felt like the first time that it was an amalgamation of, they looked tired, they looked like they didn't have any kind of new ideas to get themselves out of it, because previously it's all been in place to allow the machine with the quality that they've got to kind of all come together. But I think I remember, like, you had Mateus Nunes and Foden and Gundogan and Silva, and so when they did have the ball, they were sort of getting caught all coming towards each other.
That was
because
you
didn't have that mix. Still a couple of question marks, I think, in terms of obviously being able to break teams down. I think that as much as
I could. Do you want to go into that a bit more?
Yeah.
So I think, unless I'm wrong, stats-wise, they're the second highest scorers in the league. Could you double check that?
Let's have a look. I know that they scored. I had a look on the way in, actually, that they've last year they scored 90.
Yeah.
Last year they scored 92. This year they've got 72 goals. They have got the second most. Yeah.
Okay. So again, add context to that, because we're talking about breaking teams down. And one thing that I would say is, for some of the teams who play towards the top of the league, their job of breaking teams down is different to if like it was mid-table versus mid-table.
Sure.
Because you can have a more defensive approach. Like a team that will have lots of possession will also come against teams who are probably going to be defensively more stacked and more solid. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I guess the one thing I would say is, do you think more teams have, we were talking about that kind of the smelling of blood a little bit here, but like, do you think more teams have had a go at Man City this year than previous years?
In that middle third to / first half, I'd say yes.
Yeah,
I would agree. Come the second half of the season, I think City have managed to like figure out ways to gain possession and take the sting out of games, because that would be the problem. Like, I think to myself sometimes, like, I think it was after they played Forest in the FA Cup semi-final. I was on a show and they considered me the Man City correspondent, and I was getting battered because they were saying, "Oh, look at Forest, they had these chances, those chances, blah, blah, blah." And I'm thinking to myself, like, it's a semi-final of the FA Cup, and Forest in the first half, I think they underwhelmed. And the second half, as just a human being, you want to go and play better in the second half.
Yeah.
So your energy's up, your aggression's up, things are just different. And no two teams can be on the front foot at the same time. And we're talking about fellow professionals, and at the time, Forest were like in the top 4. So they're a good side in good confidence.
And the sort of, if you think of the kryptonite of Man City this season, that's kind of what they've got is the ability to go in transition quickly and effectively with few passes. So they're going to have a moment here and there.
Exactly. So what was the initial framing of the question now? Because I was a point I was going to try and make.
Did more teams ever go at Man City this year?
Yeah.
Because I was just looking at the table there, and you've got the I was actually looking at Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford, Fulham, like those like Fulham. I remember.
Oh, sorry, that's it. I've just remembered. Sorry. So you see our teams having a go at them, and you look at it from a very comfortable chair, talking about the game itself and seeing teams do things to other teams. And the point that someone was missing was in this game afterwards, Morgan Gibbs-White made the point that City are very, very tough to play against. And he was using that as a reason to explain why they were so much on the back foot in that first half.
Right.
But when we then talk about the game afterwards, we say, oh, it was so easy to play against City. All you need to do is X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Like the teams that have been able to thrive against City through this season, especially earlier on, they still had to do a lot of things right. They still had to defend very, very well. Like these days, like I think Guardiola mentioned that it is the Brentfords and Brightons and so on. They come from a defensive base and they have a ton of speed into hitting transition.
Very true, yeah.
Like you can have the passing and so on, but you need to have that formula.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that formula, you'll end up being in this position where you either defend well or you attack well. If you can't do both, you don't really stand a chance. And I think for City, like some teams have gone against them more, but they've earned the right to do so. And they played into that point where the sort of the confidence and the weakness was there. Because for some of those players for City, I think Vardy's probably going to get player of the season for City. He's been available for the whole year. He's done well. He's had a dip and so on, but he's done well, scored goals. But every player on that team for a spell wasn't at their best. This is the worst season Haaland's had in a long time. Obviously, he's finished on 20 whatever goals.
It's mad,
you know what I mean? You've had Phil Foden, who was player of the year, who basically this season, for many different reasons, has really struggled. So that's going to affect their creativity, but then also the nature of, like, say, controlling games. You've had the man who controls games of football, and Rodri be out for the whole season. You've had a back line, especially centrally, which has had to change throughout the year because it's like 3 weeks in, 4 weeks out, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks out. And all this stuff can really make a difference because when we think about Arsenal, we think about Liverpool from a defensive standpoint overall. When they're at their best, the names are consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, every team that wins the league, you can name the team.
You can name the team without question. You're not going to name 15, 16 players. You're going to name the team. Yeah. And also for any club, like we're always, I think with football, we get to this point where we talk about needing to have depth and so on. And depth is important, but there's probably 4 or 5 positions where you don't want to make changes. There's 4 or 5 players who are key for your team.
What are those for you then? Have a pause now, write down 4 positions, see if you get it right.
For the context of this, I'll use Liverpool, for example. Liverpool have obviously been the most consistent team this season and the best team overall, which is why they're lifting the Premier League trophy, Take out Van Dijk.
Yeah, I've got my 4.
And put in Kwanzaa. See how that goes.
Yeah.
With all due respect to him, do they win the league with Kelleher for the whole season?
I don't know, but you certainly know you've got a world-class goalie in Alisson.
Exactly. Someone who will save you in big moments. It doesn't have to be every week. But there's always a big moment where he steps up and does something,
he's incredible,
which changes the energy of that.
Yeah.
If Salah was unavailable for parts of the season, because how many times through the year do you think, oh, Salah scored the winner, Salah's got the assist for the winner,
or both?
Literally,
this year, like both.
Exactly. So there's Salah, you've got Van Dijk. You could make a case for possibly one of the midfielders.
Yeah, I would have. I think my 4 would have been the goalkeeper Van Dijk. I think Gravenberch this year because he's, just to be there and consistent, constantly playing there, sweeping things up, keeping it neat. Because otherwise, if you think as good as McAllister's been and he's outrageous, you have been able to dip in Curtis Jones now and again, and then Salah. So it's still your spine. It's just a different. It's just a bit to the side,
but that's like you don't want to find people who will be backing up those people. You just hope those people can be fit for the majority of the season, and that's the same everywhere. Like, say for Arsenal, the 2 centre backs or whatever, you put in like a Rice and Odegaard.
Yeah, that's been a big thing that, Arsenal fans have been kind of saying that. And I guess that's the funny thing with like football discourse, especially with those top teams, that it's like people don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Because, I would have Saka for 4 months of the season. Like
it's massive.
Yeah. And when I'm doing all this kind of review content, what I'm trying to do sometimes is to really afford like meaning to not just the last 3 months, but like all of it.
Yeah.
One question I did want to ask you, and if I don't ask it now, I never will, was in terms of. The point I was going to make was that what's also interesting is that what was true in a team and in a season and is maybe the top line, going into the next season, that doesn't mean it's still true. So like those problems in transition with Man City, like of course that Crystal Palace goal, right? Fine. But like it's been much better than it was in that
moment,
that sort of 2-month period where you've got all those guys going. So yeah, the question I wanted to ask you, like as a player and as a group, how and when do you reflect on the season that's gone?
I think for themselves, it's probably a bit trickier because they're in the same boat as Chelsea to where the season's not finished because they've got the Club World Cup.
Yeah.
And maybe after the Club World Cup, when they can actually take a longer period, even if it's only like 2-3 weeks, whatever, away, maybe individually they can see it from that standpoint.
Right.
But some of the baggage from this season that's just finished will be carried over to America for that, because you can't say it's a reset.
Yeah, you need to really draw a line, don't you?
Exactly, but I don't know when that line can be drawn, because for some, like, they do need to get away from this season and really think about it. But
what would you do? What did you generally do? Like, so on a personal level first, like, were you just like, it's over, I just get me out of here?
Yeah,
which is, I think that's human.
I think, do you know, to be honest, I'll put it exactly like it is. Like, I'm one of like thousands of players that's played in the Premier League, but there are people in the hundreds who are like the real difference makers in the Premier League. Like, they're the ones who will be contesting for titles every single year, who are the difference in any club that they're at. And the way that they think about things might be different to others, because I will be striving to be better and do more. And you can improve on certain things every single year to a certain extent, but it doesn't necessarily mean, like, say, for example, some of the best games I've had as a player have been in losses.
Right.
So I can't carry them. But then the downside is some of the worst games I've had of a player have been in wins.
Right.
But I don't want to discuss them, because then it means like puts a microscope on me.
And is it like, forgive me if this is rude, I hope it's not, but like the difference between, I think this is kind of what you're looking at, of like, not sticking around, but, you know, surviving in your position, as opposed to, like, Mo Salah says he goes away for 4 days and doesn't watch anything. Like, he literally just goes to
ayahuasca and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
He doesn't do that, by the way.
But that's because he has to be the difference.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
Exactly. That's a different type of pressure. And I think the difference for me is that through my career, I never played for a team whereby there's a genuine belief that they can win anything that they enter.
Yeah. And
to do that, it's not about like hoping you can do well. It's about what do you have to do to win a game of football. Doesn't matter whether you're playing in the third round against Salford or whatever, or you're playing in a Champions League final against like Inter Milan, because these guys are also like internationals. And going into this next season, you could argue it's probably the most important year in the careers of many of those, because it's before a World Cup.
Yeah, important summers, you mean, or the season? I guess the season. Yeah.
Because now, say things which you would kind of let go in the past, whereby I'm not really playing at the moment that much, but my time will come. If your time doesn't come and the World Cup comes, then all of a sudden you're not being picked for that. It's every 4 years.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. So I had Dan for HLTCO from who's a Palace fan, and we were talking about that squad and can you keep them together? And he made an incredible like argument that, you know, if you do want to play in those World Cups and you actually care about that stuff, like Mark Gay, you go sign this deal that has got a release clause that goes in a year, but you're going to play every game and in Europe, and you're going to be good to go for the World Cup.
Yeah.
Adam Wharton, you're going to play every minute. Don't go somewhere else where you're not guaranteed to play. All those things, like, do you think there's credence in that?
Yeah, I think so. I totally agree, because at the end of the day, we're talking about Wharton, Gahey, and Eze, who've all played for England already.
Yeah,
from Palace.
Yeah.
So it just shows that like you don't need to necessarily be at some of these like clubs who are going for league titles to be perceived in that manner.
Yeah.
Like those three guys are being hyped up already because of how good that they have been and how good that they could be.
Yeah. So the last thing they want to be worrying about is kind of getting the team or not.
Yeah, exactly. And don't get me wrong, there are individual things to whereby if those players did leave and went to a club and they're playing in the Champions League all of a sudden instead of the Europa League, or they're like winning a league title come the end of the year, they could still obviously go to a World Cup. But there's no real rush as such, because to be playing in the Premier League week in, week out is the objective for many players.
Yeah. And then as a group, like when you get back, and obviously you need to get fit again and all those things.
Well, again, for City and Chelsea, when did they get back? The season at the minute, it hasn't finished. That tournament is from the middle of June to the middle of July. If both teams happen to make it to the later rounds or to the final, we're talking like July 15th for the season finishing.
When's the Premier League start?
The Premier League, the Community Shield is the first week. I think it's the first weekend in August.
I think you're right.
Just compute that. Yeah.
With the World Cup on the other side of it.
Exactly. After people playing the Euros a year ago, Euros and like Copa America and stuff, literally last summer.
I think it's going to have to be one where, people are going to have to. You're going to need that squad, and you go right. You go away for 2 weeks in November.
Which that's what I mean. So from a competition standpoint, like obviously empathy within football isn't necessarily the biggest thing going. Let's be very, very clear.
I think it's seeping in.
Yeah. Just one drop in the ocean at a time. Yeah.
I think I used to be. I was like, there's championship players here playing 46 games a season. You not get on with it. But when it's 70,
right. That's what I mean. When do you know that's such a good point, because when those championship teams and football league teams play 46 plus like it's a few cup games, like it can get to 50 very quickly.
Yeah.
But then for some of these, when it is like best example in terms of wording that misleads people, it's not an international break if you're an international player.
Yeah,
it's just international games.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And they're all like, even the what's it, the Nations League. They're supposed, they're not friendlies anymore, are they?
No, every game
because they're boring.
You play for your country. Like, okay, so I've just finished this game on Saturday. Okay, we're gonna go meet up on Sunday. Okay, cool. We're gonna play 2 games.
I think sometimes I'm always looking for a crack in Declan Rice. I'm gonna since West Ham, he's been playing 70 games a season for so long. I'm like, 100%. How are you not? Let's just get me away from
ultimately, some people are very robust. You know what I mean? You look at the likes of Gareth Barry, for example, Premier League's record appearance maker and so on. And you want to be playing football because if you said, "Oh, have a week where you're not playing," people get itchy feet. They want to be doing it. Right. But in reality, the amount of football that's there, especially with this Club World Cup, it finishes the middle of July. And then someone might say, I'll take 3 weeks off. Okay, so if you have 3 weeks off, then when's your pre-season? The first game of the season?
If you take from a body point of view, if you take 3 weeks off, do you still need a pre-season?
You need something.
Quick.
You need something, yeah. You need something because essentially you wouldn't give a player 3 weeks off in the middle of the season and expect them to be back and everything fine.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Because I think also as part of that, when you have 3 weeks off, it's not just... You want them to utterly have 3 weeks off, don't you? Eat what you want, do what you really, Scott McTominay.
Yeah, exactly.
McTominay.
And you are, I think the 3 weeks off when I was playing, it was like a contractual thing.
Right.
So imagine
just
for...
a welfare thing, isn't it?
So for City and Chelsea, because it's those 2 clubs, it's probably not going to gain as much traction if it was, say, clubs that are sort of part of a...
I think it's a mental problem more than a physical one.
I'd say it's both. Because in fairness, to bring it back to City again, what's interesting about...
This could happen every time we talk.
It's fine, I know, apologies. What makes this trickier, also more interesting rather, is from a City standpoint, there are players like Nathan Ake, John Stones, who could be coming back to fitness to play in the Club World Cup, who've been missing for the league for the last 2-3 months.
Yeah.
And City have had to look at this season for being like a calendar year. So for them, they can come back and start playing, and all of a sudden that 3 weeks isn't a big deal to them because they want to keep playing. So in terms of City maybe putting some games on, they might be putting games on for people who only came back in the back half of the season.
Yeah.
Like Rodri, for example.
Yeah.
Rodri could be playing games after that's finished. But then how about someone like Vardiol, who started in August last year?
I guess there's going to be these, those are decisions that will need to be made.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this is interesting. So with the summer window with Man City, there are only 2 arrivals, Savinho, 21 million, Gundogan on a free.
Yes.
Sold Julian Alvarez, who's a key member in this 23-24 campaign, made 54 appearances, nearly 3,500 minutes. And City scored 32 goals in their first 19 Premier League games. City then scored 40 in their last 19 games. I did want to talk about Alvarez, but I also think within this, when I'm looking at the summer window and obviously the January window, with that Club World Cup and knowing that's there, do you think, as much as it was the disappointment and the holes in the squad that maybe needed plugging to ensure that you got yourself in the Champions League, was it also one where you've kind of felt like, in terms of integrating players into this team for next season, you had to go big in January because of that, just to get them in?
I don't. In my mind, I don't think any club wants to go big in January.
Yeah,
because you want stuff to be set from the summer window. And the reaction to them say, for example, when they brought in the 2 centre halves in Vitor Reis and Kuzanov, at that time, they probably had 1 or 2 fit centre halves available. And those players...
Kuzanov went straight in, didn't he?
Literally, that first 10, 15 minutes, and I think, unfortunately, I feel some people get as attached to that 15 minutes and that game, rather, as some people got attached to Spurs' high line 2 seasons ago against Chelsea. They just, when they think about Spurs, think about that line.
Yeah.
And things change in time, but that's just what you attach it to. So, and I don't think that's
right. Had a tough time against Real Madrid as well. But
again,
that can be difficult.
But then that's welcome. Right. To be fair, that was the only 2 games Real Madrid played well all season, it feels like. But anyway, so I think he's 19. There's he's 20. There's a 19 and 20-year-old. So they've brought them in January. And for a couple of them, the two of them did play. Kuzanov ends up playing more, and they're playing because, again, Guardiola's picking what he has available. Kuzanov, throughout this last half of the season, I don't think he's been picked ahead of a Ruben Diaz or a Vardiol or an Akanji, people like that who are fit. And that's essentially the way that you'd expect like a 21-year-old to be seen in that setup, when the players who are ahead of him are more senior and, they've been through it and done it, especially in the back half of the season. So I think the recruitment that they did, I don't think it's built necessarily around the World Cup. There was a need in that moment. But now that also helps the club in terms of trying to be more thoughtful about the future, because a lot of those centre-halves and stuff that they have, they're not old, but they're older to the point where they have one of the highest average ages of squad in the league.
And they've been about, as well. I guess that's like, they've been, you kind of focus on the attacking players naturally, but like, those players have been playing 70 games a season for a while as well. Yeah. So you do wonder how that will kind of.
But you wouldn't want to do it in January. I think that's the bigger point, because then when you do it in January, it's fine. But the position you mentioned about Alvarez going, like Alvarez was like several players, and this is one of those hindsight transfers.
Yeah. So in hindsight, do you feel like, maybe we could have kept hold of him?
No, because this is like the Cole Palmer one. This is like a hindsight
he wanted
transfer.
To go.
Yeah, like if I think for the years as well that City have done well, they've been in a position whereby everyone's pulling in the same direction. If you have one or two that don't, everything can be disrupted. And the runs that they've had in the back half of the season, whether it's going up against against Liverpool, against Arsenal in the Champions League, like you can't afford to have a bad week. Like we've seen teams have bad weeks in like March, April, and everything goes kaput. Yeah. The season just before this one, I can pinpoint the weekend when Liverpool lost at home to Palace and Arsenal lost at home to Villa, and City went from third to first, and then they never made it up. You can't have a bad week, but some of those weeks can be happening when, say, not everyone's got the right mindset for the moment. Right. So Alvarez was somebody who, rightly so, wanted to play more football. There's no guarantee that City could be giving him more football. So would you rather have a player that's potentially discontent in key moments, or a player who essentially is going to get what they want and for the amount of money that they got as well? Yeah.
I think that's a big thing. The money was great.
Yeah.
Like for what he had done previously, the money was brilliant. I think they kind of needed to do it. And again, you go back to what were we saying at the start of the season? Man City were very healthy. They brought back Gundogan. You thought everything was sweet. I think.
And you didn't legislate. Nobody legislated for the season that Phil Foden's just had.
I was going to say, yeah,
because he's player of the season.
Yeah,
you had a player of the season and a Ballon d'Or in your team, and then all of a sudden the player of the season is nowhere near his best for the entire season. The Ballon d'Or's not there for the whole season.
I was thinking about this with not with him really, but with a few players that, like, when you have, even say like a Rashford, let's chuck him in there as well. When players have these like heights, and then they have a struggle. I was kind of like, what's the truth? Can you bounce back to the similar heights, or is there going to be a sort of like, I always have a bit of a theory, like when those young players come in and they're exciting and they don't really understand the context of which they're kind of going through. They're just having fun and playing. There's such power in that when everyone's constantly going, Yamal's only 16, Yamal's only 16, like, and he might be the exception, right? But living in that space is a far easier space than being a 24-year-old, where you've got like you've seen a little crack here and there in maybe your sort of mental fragility, or just naturally getting older and having to sort of deal with the pressure of life, of status, of all those things.
I think where I would probably separate Phil Foden from Marcus Rashford in particular is like Phil Foden, relatively speaking, individually and collectively in his career has been very, very successful. You know what I mean? In terms of trophy wins and things like that.
Sure.
He's not been attached to like a negative spell. Like, unfortunately for Marcus, he's been attached to this really negative spell for United.
Yeah.
To a point where
massively
he's not expected to by everyone, but it was hoped that he'd be the one that would elevate the club at certain times. Like, he is the key to it all. And I think for Phil, this season has been his worst season. His other season, last season, was amazing. The seasons before were really good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this season feels more like the outlier as opposed to the other ones.
But is that those woes are the woes of Rashford and the woes of Foden, are they built on, the team's success as much as him individually.
I think from when the team struggled this season for City, like speaking with some of my friends who support City, I'd say, who's your player of the season for this season? And for the first time in a while, they couldn't name multiple people.
Yeah.
And some of the names that they were mentioned came with a little caveat. And I think some of it like comes with the likes of, I know he can live and die on his Rodri hill, and they didn't necessarily need to be as bad as they were in total this season without Rodri, but there are other reasons for it. But what I think Rodri really brought and what he brings is that he complements every one of the combinations you could have.
Right.
Like, I know what a Rodri and Kovacic midfield looks like. I know what a Rodri, Bernardo Silva and Gundogan midfield looks like. A Rodri, Kevin De Bruyne and whoever midfield looks like, because you know how he links them all together.
Yeah.
You take that away, and now who's the profile of player that can do what he does? Because Nico has come in and he's more of a 6'6".
Right.
But Rodri's also scored like 10 goals last season.
Yeah, Rodri's he's a got it player.
He's a freak.
Like, he's like so like if any sort of problem that's happening, got it.
Yeah,
he's got it.
He's
Like,
freak, mate.
do you need someone to get across? Then read it. Got it. Do you need someone to drive the game? Got it. Do you need a goal? Got it.
Awesome dictator of tempo. Awesome dictator of tempo.
In terms of like the house of cards of Man City, like it falling down in that period of time because of him. Where do you stand on that?
I think that's very, very important. I think they started the season without.
Thank God.
Yeah,
I was going to go.
Yeah, they started.
I was waiting to go. I don't think I was ever going to.
Obviously, they started the season without him, and I remember the first
idiot.
game of the season was against Chelsea, and Kovacic was really good in that spot. But Kovacic himself is not a 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But also, right? Can you do this for me just this once? Yeah, you got this energy. You can be about it. If you got to do it for 30 games, it's a different feeling.
It's 100% different feeling. But then also for some of those players, I think Kovacic was loosely included in this. They weren't available for the full 30 games. Like availability is like a cliche or whatever, is one of your best abilities.
Yeah.
Because if you are there, then you can navigate your way through highs and lows and continue to develop and build. And you can be somebody who can be relied upon to sort of underpin like other things going on the pitch. But yeah, like the profile, everyone says, City needed 6, City needed 6. But I'd argue, because in the last like third of the season, Nico hasn't started as many games as people thought, but City have defensively been better. And that's with Mateus Nunes at right back. Yeah. And Nico O'Reilly at left back. Those two attacking midfielders playing fullback. So there's been more a change in style of play than the importance of the 6. And a prime example was like in the game against Palace, which obviously they lost. You think that with Eze, with Sarr, with Mateta, you'd need a 6. But then Guardiola understood that, like, for Palace, they don't necessarily keep enough possession in those areas to require 6 to do that. And he decided to defend it with more of a back 3 and stuff in transition. And obviously it didn't work out for that particular moment. But defensively against Palace, they did better.
Couldn't get out, yeah.
That's what I mean. They did better than they did times gone by. And that wasn't just down to Palace saying
I'll
in the
say
moment.
it for you. Like, Palace were bad. Like, overall,
Palace were defensively.
Did what they needed to do.
That's the point.
Yeah.
They did
and who
what they
gives
needed
a
to
shit?
do. And that's the whole point of the finals.
Like QPR derby. Like, it's the same thing. You got
Just
to
do
get
what
to
you
a
need to
position,
do.
do what you got to do.
That was not Palace's best game, but
No.
because they won, that's the main thing. But City, in terms of trying to limit transitions, after the first goal and one transition after, defensively they were making sure that Palace couldn't really hit them on the break. Yeah, which is skill in itself. But yeah, to get back to like those sorts of points, I think City changed the style that they had in those that final period of the season, and you could see its benefit. Because prime example was in that first half against Forest, they'd keep the ball, which would be breaking opposition. Because let's call it what it is. Yeah, as a player, you do not want to play a game of football where you do not touch the ball. Yeah, because all that is cardio. Yeah. Yeah. Nobody's trying to just go out on a pitch and just do cardio.
And also, it's like it's a shock when you get it.
Yeah,
and so you're sort of like, what do I do with this?
So then counter it now, because now somebody's in your face, putting you immediately under pressure. And you might have an out ball, like with Palace, they always had Munoz driving down that side. That's his thing. But all of a sudden, when Munoz can't get forward, like, okay, let's move it round now. And now it's passing without purpose. Yeah. And then when it's passing without purpose, all of a sudden it's a turnover. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because I will just shell it long. All right, cool. Now let's bed in. Here's the next 5 minutes of pressure. Yeah. You know what I mean? These things do make a difference.
Pep, this is a ripple from with Pep Guardiola. He said he could quit as Man City boss if the squad size isn't reduced.
Really interesting, this.
Yeah. Really Guardiola's always made it clear that he prefers to have a smaller core group of around 18, 19 players to work with, not including academy players. However, with injury issues this season, City were often unable to field a proper defensive unit at one stage, saying himself he only had 13 fit players back in October. Guardiola then spoke about how next season he may need a bigger squad to cope with all these competitions, referencing the Club World Cup taking place in June, July. barely giving players too much time to have a break over the summer. But now, just days ago, Guardiola has gone back to insisting his squad, it needs to be smaller next season, as it is impossible for my soul to leave so many players out.
It's a real thing, It's a real thing. And I know it sounds like a proper, like, privileged position to be in, and in some ways it is. But that's the human side of it.
Yeah.
Because on any different week, say, for example, Oscar Bob, like, huge talent, huge talent. City fans are so excited to see him back.
Yeah.
So he breaks his leg the week before the season starts, and he's out for the majority of the season. But I think he's been fit for the last month, 2 months. But he's missing out on squads.
Right.
He's not being selected because if you put it this way, especially with the likes of Rodri coming back, Ake coming back, and so on, Akanji coming back, right? So if they come back in, then what happens to Vitor Reis? What happens to Kuzanov? Yeah, right. Echeverria is coming in the squad this time. So what happens to James McAtee? You say, okay, so this week Savinho's playing. So who are we going to put? Who's going to be on the bench? Okay, well, it's going to be Doku. Well, if Doku's on the bench, then what happens to Oscar Bob?
Yeah,
And
just to add to this point. With what, let's say, a bloated squad, for want of a better phrase, especially with the academy players that you want, like Echeverria and McAtee, or O'Reilly, you kind of want to make space for. But in the same breath,
Rico Lewis, by the way, scored in the semi-final of the FA Cup, and then in the final, I don't think he was in the squad.
Wow! But in the same breath, would you say Man City need players this season?
I think they need players to be available for longer periods. There are some players in that team who've probably played 20 to 25 games in what's been like a 50-plus game season.
Right.
And as a consequence, like...
It's the consistency of that first
consistency
50.
Of availability, yeah. That is what should underpin it.
Interesting. Because I was listening to a video. It's a channel. It's the guy's called Nobbins. He's a Man City guy. He's very good. Just to give him a shout out.
Shout out to
But
Nobbins,
he was I think he was answering questions, and he was kind of talking about, do we need another? We kind of need another 10. We need a fullback. We need 2 fullbacks. We need another goalkeeper because Ederson might go. And I was sort of like, well, and obviously you've brought in all these guys during January as well, and you've got Rodri to come back as well. So there's a lot going on.
There is,
in this squad.
There is a lot, and it's
so many question marks.
And again, it's a privileged position to be in, to where you have too many players. Historically, that's not what City have had. Yeah,
right.
But they've got too many players, and the manager's got real options, and he can pick an 11.
Do you know what he used to do brilliantly as well? He would go like, you just wouldn't see Phil Foden from November to January, and then he'd rock up in February, and play all those Champions League. To do that, like that's what he wants to get.
You need availability. And the point I was making earlier was like, he rotates 3 or 4 players every single week, to where when the season ends, there'll probably be 3 or 4 that have played the majority of games. But everyone else has also played a lot of games together.
Yeah.
That's in the league and then Champions League and so on.
That's a really good point as well, that he starts them. He doesn't. It's not like we're going to give you 30. We're going to give you 30. We're going to give you like plays. It's 100%. Like a 60-30 thing, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, so it'd be interesting to see what the summer looks like in terms of deciding who he wants to leave, but also who wants to leave.
Right.
Because you could say, for example,
well, let's go through a few. Got a little keeper.
Is this going to be a case of who wants to stay or who they do want to go?
I think what you wonder might be right. Obviously, you can't be certain with it. Well, it's your opinion, really. However you want to apply context is kind of up to you, really.
Okay, I'll make my guesses about whether the manager wants them to stay, and we'll do everything to keep them stay.
Yeah, nice. Ederson.
Stay.
Really?
Yeah, I can't see why he would want him to leave.
So again, in this same video, sorry, Nobbins, 2 shout-outs, bloody hell. He said Ederson wanted to go last year, but the money wasn't right, and he wants to go this year. And certainly one of those 2 goalkeepers will want to go because Ortega's too good to be.
Exactly, but then you put in this position where if Ederson goes, then you bring in another goalkeeper anyway.
Yeah, and who is that guy? That's the thing.
Exactly.
And
I think City wants him to stay, but then also it's like the mentality of the players.
Injuries.
For Ederson,
yeah.
What's his per season?
That's this season. Last 12 months.
Yeah,
so
this
like
year.
Five different injuries, and he's 31. Which is not old for a goalie, is it?
Ortega's very good. Ederson, like on his day, is also very good. But what Ederson offers you, he's got 5 assists or whatever in the Premier League.
Yeah. This season's crazy.
Like that's a fundamental way in terms of when they have the ball. Because from when I was playing, if the ball went back to the goalkeeper, you could go and press them and make them uncomfortable. If you give it to Edison now,
Yeah, it's a joke.
you stepping off because you're thinking, if I'm going to sacrifice something here.
Yeah, you got to be careful in letting that go if you can't sort of massage it enough to stay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So do you think Ortega will go then?
I think they'll same too next season.
Really? Might be. So I'll jump to one later down the list because we speak about him every summer. I feel like Edison's kind of getting in that one.
You can say Bernardo Silva.
Yeah, Bernardo Silva. It's like every year we have this conversation.
I think if Bernardo Silva was to leave, I think he'd leave on a better feeling. I think he himself was talking recently about how he said, "quote This is me."
He's very honest this season, wasn't he?
Yeah, because it's fair. Because you can't not be like he's part of the fabric of that football club now. He's been there for so long. So he's seen it all. He's seen what it takes to be successful. Seen what happens when it's not successful. And I think he said that you learn a lot about the team when things aren't going well. And for him to come out and say that in the open means that he knows what's right and what's wrong. And I don't think he'll be the person now to decide this is the time to get off. I think if anything, he'll probably have a greater understanding of who to rely on in the next season.
Right.
Than deciding to get away.
What? And so you'd want to keep him?
I'd want to keep him, yeah.
Interesting.
Because he's not even I saw some stats yesterday, which was sent over by one of my colleagues at BBC, Chris Collison. He's somebody who's got one of the slowest sprint speeds.
Yeah.
But one of the highest total distance covered.
Yeah.
So influence and stuff. Like when you say he's older, his legs are going. Like he never had
bollocks
speed.
It's bollocks that. That winds me up, that one.
Especially, do you know what else really gets me as well? So when we think about top speed, there are so many players who are the proverbial off a shovel, rapid, but it's never necessarily the players that you believe. Because you say Van der Ven, he's one. Did you see who's two?
Alanga?
No, Alanga was 3.
Right.
Mateus Nunes was 2.
Really?
There you go, my boy.
Do you know what it is? I guess it's like
There you go, my boy. You would have said that, would you?
Never. You could have given me 100. I guess.
There you go. And some of the players that form that top 10 aren't the players who you always believe to be the quickest. Because another one was Kyle Walker was never in that top section.
Do you know, I guess is it? It's part of it as well. Does their role need them to sprint, and do they want to sprint? You know, some players want to go.
Yeah,
I mean?
Some players want to go, but sometimes, especially if you're a defender, you're having to go because you're trying to catch up on things.
Yeah.
But
so Van der Ven, it suits, doesn't it?
It suits that style because he's got that.
Yeah.
His acceleration's great. He'll do it. But then there's some players who actually don't want to sprint. Some players that do want to sprint, but just don't really have the structure for it. But essentially, those numbers don't lie. If you're marking Alanga and he's running full speed, you have to attempt full speed to try and catch him. There've been 19 teams this season that have had defenders who've had the chance to try and go full speed against him.
Yeah, true.
Because it's not running full speed in a vacuum. It's on the pitch.
In a vacuum.
You know what I mean?
Because the final thing on Silva, I think, when you look at that, it's about the balance of the midfield as well. So when his
versatility is kind of big, though.
Yeah, but I think the team needed to be in a different place to what it was like when you've got Kovacic and Silva and Gundogan and Foden. You've just got no physicality, so you're sort of quietly asking him to sort of dial up something that's never what he's been.
What do you mean when you say physicality? What does that mean?
Ability to go and win the ball, go and drive with the ball at pace, like in a Declan Rice style more so than a Bernardo Silva.
That's very specific. That's a very specific thing. No, you're talking about Declan Rice in particular. Which
but I think they were getting. You can't. I don't think you can dispute that they were getting hurt in transition. And so when
why weren't they getting hurt as much in the back third of the season? Because the personnel was basically the same.
I think I guess the change in style of play a little bit.
So that's the thing for me, because I understand the idea of the physicality thing because I see it myself, but that's something which would be exploited more. Like, say, Declan Rice's ability to run with the ball. He can do that against everyone.
But so with Silva during that period, I would look at him and think, you're being asked to cover too much ground here.
At full speed, you mean? I think I
full
don't
stop.
For the record, I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think there's more to it because, again, those same players in the back third of the season played a different style, which meant that teams didn't do it as often.
Right.
So what has really changed? Because we can talk about, it's the same for me. Like, a year ago, players at City won the league 4th time in a row, record breakers, whatever. And then 7 months later, people are saying they're too old now. But that's a very significant 7 months because at times, I don't think that's fair because at times, the way that they were playing led to a lot of people not looking to be at their absolute best, but they did improve. Well, why? It's because little things can change, which make a bigger difference in football.
Yeah.
Like, say, the prime example, in my opinion, a year and a bit ago, Mo Salah's having arguments with Jurgen Klopp on the side of the pitch against West Ham. Salah had a hamstring injury. They're arguing, like throwing hands off, all this stuff. It's beef, yeah. A year later, Salah has the best season of his like life. How's that possible when he's a year older?
Yeah. I guess it's a mindset thing. It's a settled squad. It's a million different things.
A few people were saying he was washed a year ago.
Yeah, that's mental. I mean, a few people said it 2 weeks ago, just because he's like.
Same with Van Dijk. Van Dijk was washed.
Yeah.
Allegedly, a year and a bit ago.
I just thought. I wondered with Van Dijk, was it the case of like, can you get back to that level? But he had to evolve and change, and he did, and he's outrageous. But you're right. But the team around it, yeah. And the sort of romance you can chuck on it, is allowed, is facilitated when a team wins.
Yeah, 100%,
so when a team, it just looked like he looked more exposed, he looked more tired, but I don't think that was his fault.
Yeah, that's the way that City were playing in that moment, to where so many mistakes that they were making, especially ones in possession, led to so many transitions. Because I think it's a transition. City, for a spell, when they were at their absolute best, they would have so much possession in your half. And at times it would frustrate fans, but they would never make a decision that would cost the ball to be turned over, people to be out of position. Very regularly, it was being dealt with. They'd lose the ball, they'd win it back straight away, and they'd be strangling the opposition.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden now, people were trying to force things, almost like trying to be a hero, but people weren't in the right spot as well. And certain people around it weren't playing to the best. And also, like, narrative-wise, when's this going to come out?
Tomorrow.
Okay. So this is before the Champions League final. It is literally Inter Milan versus PSG, the oldest team in the competition versus the youngest team in the competition. The narrative is set around whoever wins, they've won because of their experience or because of their youth.
Right, yeah.
And that's the stupidity of football. You know what I mean? And so for some of those players at City, it's like physically, legs, and it's almost, they all fall into the same sort of like thing. But in reality, like Van Dijk and Salah are 33 and 34 years old.
So with things like that, then you don't like to attribute it to that.
No, you can see.
You want it to be a game. A game is a game is a game.
A game is a game is a game, and I think the confidence and belief that you have in any particular moment can dictate how you look. And if you're in the right team and people are playing well, you can be a part of that. Whereas if you don't, then you can be highlighted as being an issue.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily the case, because, like, for Bernardo Silva and so on, he hasn't had his best season for City. You could say it's probably been one of his worst.
Yeah.
But in the last few weeks, he's been one of the key players for City, and them given a chance to potentially win an FA Cup. And then finishing like in the top 5
comfortably. Well, they're only a few points off Arsenal by the end of it.
Literally, yeah.
Nathan Ake.
I think Nathan Ake is a big player for them. Like, he's an unsung hero, and from the outside, people who don't really watch City on a week-to-week basis, they don't see the value that he brings. Because with him and, say, like Vardy on that left side, sometimes Ake centre back, sometimes he might be to the left side. But as a 1v1 defender, he's one of the best that City have. His composure on the ball and the balance that he can bring on that side. And also, it's another threat from set pieces, which I think they kind of missed out on a little bit this season, because years gone by, they've had 2 or 3 players who step up with big goals throughout the season, but he's not been there. And I'd like to think that they try and keep him, because if you don't, I think it's very hard to replace.
Ruben Dias?
I think he has to stay, because he's captain figure basically for the club.
John Stones? It's been a tough time for Stones.
It's been a tough time for John Stones throughout the last few years, because he's never played as many games as he would like, but his influence and seasons and the way that people remember him, it's been massive.
Yeah.
Chipping in with big goals, chipping in when he was playing midfield, getting a man-of-match performance in the Champions League final. But again, he's a player that, unfortunately for him, and this is not his fault as such, probably going to play maximum between 20 and 25 league games a season.
Yeah.
Due to availability. And that's not
weird.
enough.
It's like,
that's not enough.
Could be... It could, if his body is feeling like it's struggling, and I guess I don't know how you build that up. Obviously, I'm not an athlete, but like that, it might be one where it's say he's happy to stay there for that.
I don't think he would be. I don't think. I think the players who sit at the very top of the tree in terms of success, none of them are actually happy to just play every now and again.
Yeah,
doesn't matter what age you are.
I wonder where he would want to go.
I wonder who'd look at him and think he's the right profile player for us.
Yeah.
Because the style of play that he has, if you remember when he was at Everton, he like did a trick or whatever, and he's having to tell the crowd to calm down.
Yeah.
So him at his position now, everything that he's won and so on, where does he go? Whereby is really welcome. Because for me, I see it like a Villa, but Ezri Konsa's top.
Yeah. He's so good, Ezri Konsa.
Ezri Konsa's top. And it's not to say John Stones can't play instead of him, whatever. But if you're Villa, why would you need
Why would
to
you
find a
bother?
replacement for Ezri
Yeah,
Konsa?
totally agree. Yeah, you wonder where he would want to go. Let us know on Spotify or wherever you're watching this. We have comment sections. I'd be intrigued to know, where do you think John Stones would go and would be a good fit? Kyle Walker, I think that's kind of done, isn't it?
That ship sailed.
Yeah. Gundogan.
Crazy thing is that he scored his first goal of the season, last game of the season, with an absolute banger of a goal, the overhead kick against Fulham. I think with Gundogan, he came in this season and he probably didn't expect to play as many games as he did. But he's understanding of the game, because he's one of those people who's like a good go-between between the manager and the playing staff, because he can understand what the manager wants and he sees it, because he's basically had him the whole time he's been at City. And he can input that on the field, and his eye for the game and the vision and so on. I think it's massive. And I think if City were to lose Gundogan and De Bruyne at the same time, I think they're missing something in and around that sort of like 10 space in terms of how they see the game.
Yeah, I would say with Gundogan as well. I guess it's going to be interesting how Pep sort of looks to, how does it, how does he cope with his sort of love of control? Like, will he, he's spoken about this sort of rise in rhythm, and everyone's touched on that interview where he's kind of said that and touched on the teams that be able to move the ball quickly. I think Marmoush is a big part of that. Gundogan, like to the same point of Bernardo Silva, like he's always been a sort of ghostly player, if you know what I mean. And it's always been about like the top 2 inches with him anyway. So like again, you could just kind of throw that like, oh, I guess his legs are gone. But like, the season before when he's at Barcelona, like
what are we talking
what's
about?
the difference?
Yeah,
it's madness.
It's just people.
So I don't really know what the truth is.
I think you mentioned that element of control, and some fans really like hate the idea of a team that has possession. People say, I don't like watching City, it's boring, and so on and so forth. Well, in reality as well, outside of this season, if you want to see a team score goals, you watch City, because they've been top scorers in the division.
Yep.
But sometimes it's spoken about as if the control means that they win games 1-0 every single week. That's all it is. It's not the case at all. I
think, like, for me personally, it's more a change in pace and not knowing what they're gonna do with it. Like at the FA Cup game, for me. And then, look, again, to be honest, with the FA Cup game, when you go back and you look at the stats, there's 3 big chances. They missed a penalty. Like there's, in another day in a league game, they win that because the occasion feels maybe different, right? But there were moments where I was sort of like Doku. I'm struggling with Doku a bit.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think I can
do
understand.
something different. It feels a bit predictable at times.
Yeah, but that's not. This is something else I had to mention on the show straight after the game. Well, somebody was saying the players are being like overcoached or whatever, and I said in reality they're not. Like a manager can set them up to think about things in a certain way, but when they're out there on the pitch, the manager, it's not like NFL where you've got like an earpiece where somebody's telling you what to do and where to go and so on.
Yeah,
it's down to Doku to make those better decisions. And there were times where some of those players in that game, like I spoke with John Stones after the game, and he was watching it and he's like, "What? Just shoot, just shoot, just shoot." And that's coming from a player who's part of the system.
Yeah.
So he knows himself, like they're not shooting. The reason they're not shooting isn't because the manager's told them to not shoot.
Yeah. And De Bruyne is not safe either.
Yeah.
Like for me, it was more a tempo thing at times as well. Whereas like De Bruyne was standing in these half spaces, and I was sort of like, just fucking drill it into him.
The problem with this perspective here that you have is a similar one which I have. Like I think I'd be a far better player if I saw the game the same way I see it from higher up. Because when you come down to ground level, you see a lot of bodies. Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
That's the thing. And to be able to see something that looks really clear from where we are, like say even for example, Doku taking someone on, he's got 2 men standing in front of him. The space that we're anticipating he's going to get into to get a crossing or a pass or whatever, he can't even see it in that moment.
Yeah, maybe. I think with the De Bruyne, all I know is when I played football, if there's a better player, your job is to get the ball to that better player. I remember you telling me the story about David Silva, where it's like, well, you had a guy on your back, and David goes, no, but that's what I want.
Wants it,
so don't overthink that. Just get it to like those guys that can be the difference. Because to that point, Kevin De Bruyne doesn't overthink and go, oh no, the boss said we shouldn't play.
Yeah, he's looking for it.
He plays it and does it.
Again, to add to what Palace did well on the day, like when De Bruyne gets the ball, whether it's in fact, if we've got time, I'll be very specific about this. Yeah. So what City did well on that day, which won't get any credit because they lost, is they set up it so that they attacked with a back 3 in play who were there to deal with any transitions. Yeah. Yep. And the midfielders they had on the day, because Kovacic was injured, was De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva. Yeah. Out wide, you had Savinho and you had Doku. You had Haaland through the middle and Marmoush. So strongest part for Palace is in the centre because you've got the 3 centre halves and the 2 sixes. And out wide, Doku and Savinho would get the ball high, and it would never be a centre back coming out. It's always the wing back.
Yeah.
Something that City have done really well across many years is they would do underlaps, and the underlaps would come from Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva. But they knew the importance of them sitting around centrally in that spot. Yeah. So you'd see Doku get the ball and Savinho get the ball, and you'd almost be like encouraged. Sorry, we forgot about Nico O'Reilly, who I think his role within that game probably he didn't do as well as, say, the manager would have hoped he'd have from an impact standpoint. Some of that's down to Palace. But the underlaps would come, and that level of creativity from an underlap is really confusing as a defender to deal with because you're used to overlaps and seeing someone make a run in front of you. Yeah. So now City couldn't do that. Yeah. So as a consequence, the work that those wingers had to do was different. But the reason it was like that is because Vardiol, Ruben Diaz, and Akanji had to be set for the transition. They had to be. And the moment they go forward one time and disregard that, Sarr's into space, Eze's into space, Mateta's into space. So that's a game plan which would have been seen as a masterstroke if City would have scored. But because they didn't, all of a sudden it's like, well, why isn't there more creativity? Because it has to come through structure.
Yeah.
It has to. That's the frustrating part, but it has to.
Yeah, I get that. It's more of a pace thing for me. More of a see it, do it kind of thing. That sounds like...
It sounds super basic, but I know where you're coming from.
Yeah. Anyway, so last one, because this is important, or last two. So just to keep or sell on this one, Kovacic.
I think you got to keep him, yeah.
Okay.
Technician. Scored some big goals this year. The Grealish ones, yeah, of course, yeah. And that's the one, do you know, I was a bit annoyed the other day. I saw a video.
Don't go and talk sport if you see Jack Grealish.
I don't do that. I saw a headline, it was from like Sky Sports talking about Guardiola flips out after dropping Grealish or whatever. And I'm thinking, after dropping Grealish, like, he's in a press conference, someone's asked him a question about Grealish, but that he hasn't just dropped Grealish in this press conference. And this is a bigger thing. Guardiola knows Jack as a person very deeply, but he also knows that how good Jack can be and how good he is in any particular moment. The best version of Jack Grealish, Grealish would probably say in his career, was when he was playing for City in the last third of the season when they won the Champions League. Yeah. Because he was playing every single game, defensively and in attack, he was like on it. Might not have had the assists and really obvious goals and stuff that would, stand out when you look back at a game. But if you watch the games, he was as important to them as anyone else on that pitch. Yeah. Totally. So Guardiola knows and understands what he can do. Those next 2 seasons, he's not been that same player. Sometimes it's been through injury, because I think the year after he was injured quite a bit throughout certain parts of the season. So he could never get into a rhythm. And then other times where he was in the team and he wasn't playing to his best. Reasons for that, City probably know. Grealish probably knows. We don't know. We can speculate, but we don't know. But now it's year 4, year 5 with him as a player who's drifting towards 30, if he's not 30 already, who's not going to be playing week in, week out at City unless he's at his absolute best. But him at his absolute best has been a while ago. The care that City fans have for him is one whereby they want to see him playing somewhere, but they can't at this moment in time justify why he should be playing ahead of anybody else. So I think Jack is probably going to find somewhere else to go and play. I think City will probably give him the chance to do that because careers, they don't last forever. Yeah. And I think Jack will probably look back and think he's not wasted these last 2 years, but he's good enough to be a bigger part of it for someone else.
You talk about Villa, the obvious first team that you would go to with him is Villa.
You think so?
I think not.
What position?
I think more centrally. I think there's
instead of like Ramsey and people like that.
Yeah, I love him in that position. And I remember we fuck off. QPR beat. It is we.
Yes, we. Yeah. We played well that day. Yeah.
We beat 1-0 under McLaren, and he got fouled so much, and he played as a midfielder in that game, and he was fantastic. And if you think about how Villa can transition sometimes, they scored a great goal against Newcastle.
Yeah.
I could say, you'll have similar questions where can you get him in the team? How do you work that? Do you understand someone like Jacob Ramsey? Can you pay for his wages? Like all these different things when it comes to PSR.
So you're talking like Ramsey, Morgan Rogers type position.
Yeah.
I'd like to see him there. He's a good enough player to be able to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But also there's stuff probably in his mind and so on where he needs to figure out a way to get back to his absolute best. Yeah. Because if it was simple, you'd been playing as good as he played 2 years ago. But it's not been the case. And I think at times, we don't know the full story. Same with like Foden and others. I think there's a lot going on, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well.
Okay. So last question, I guess. What happens next year? Like, how do you feel this one kind of plays out? Like you say, the Club World Cup is obviously a factor in all of it.
So tricky that,
Yeah.
It's like it's nightmare fuel that for some managers, because the next season will just begin by the time the season's finishing. But I think,
yeah, we're talking about like the mental break for the players.
Yeah,
about Pep.
Yeah, I think next year probably be his last year anyway. But I think, and also court decisions and so on to come out at some point.
Yeah,
who knows how that'll affect things?
Yeah.
Who knows how that'll affect things? But I think it's just a tale where if they would have had their players available this season, there's no guarantee they would have won the league, but they wouldn't be on 71 points.
Yeah.
Because that middle third, when they lost 6 games in a row, the thing that really stood out for me, like I saw the profile of team they'd be playing against and I could see why they'd cause troubles, because you're looking at Bournemouth, you're looking at Brightons and so on. Spurs, so I could see it. But with all due respect to any team that's done it, and maybe I've done this at QPR possibly a couple of times, but you don't lose 6 games in a row.
Yeah.
You might go 6 games without a win, but you do not lose 6 games in a row. That's insanity for a team that's that good.
Yeah.
That's insanity, because you could have a world where Southampton don't lose 6 games in a row. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
or like derbies or whatever.
Yeah. I think you're picking teams that all have maybe done that. But yeah, I get the point.
But you know what I mean? But that's like,
but not Man City.
Yeah, but that's bonkers.
Yeah,
like, just
bizarre.
draw some.
It's bizarre.
Draw some. Like, you don't have to win all 6, but draw some.
Yeah.
But that spell that came, that was when the confidence was low. The squad was at its worst position in terms of availability. And I think going into the next year, if some of those players can be available for longer periods of time, then they are objectively better, because we've seen in the last third, like in the last 20 games, they've had more points than anyone else in the league.
Yep.
Some of that could be down to, say, Liverpool having already won the league and more or less being at Nicky Beach, wherever it was they were at like a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
But, and Arsenal knowing that, they can't finish top, so the energy's different. But the fact is, when it came time to try and achieve something, which was to be in the Champions League, they performed results-wise in a manner which we've seen in years gone by. Yeah,
I think it's interesting. As much as it's about Man City, it's about Arsenal and Liverpool a little bit. I think Liverpool smell blood a little bit and haven't used their money. So that's all very exciting, but can that actually play out? Like, he's going to play differently on a slot.
Yeah, I think it
clearly.
Will, yeah. I think for me, bringing in Frimpong's interesting, because I don't see him as a right back. He's more like an attacking right wing back. Totally. Yeah, totally. So what's the statement of intent there?
Well, we've got a video coming soon, but I think what you think of Frimpong, yes, in the final third, but maybe not as much or as quickly in build up. And I think within that there's a gamble. Yeah, you will do something different. And to be honest, Liverpool, I still expect them to be competing for titles anyway. There's no drama with that. I think it'll be Arsenal competing for a title next year. Yeah. But then you just hope that things go your way to make yourself as competitive as you need to be. Yeah, that's it. I think what Liverpool should be trying to do, and they seem quite, they've got real intent with what they're doing. And, if they can get someone like Wirtz through the door, that puts real pressure on Man City and Arsenal to be really good from the off. I think that's what Liverpool are trying to do, and I like that. I don't, in terms of pressure, weirdly, I think the team with the most pressure next year will be Arsenal, because you'll either have not bought the striker, and there's the story, or you have bought the striker and he better be good, and this team better do it this year. So if you had to do pressure rankings, you think Arsenal 1, who's 2? Next week, pressure rankings going into next season. I think it's on Arsenal, because that, like, the craziness that comes when you're not getting what you want. Yeah. Man City have been very fortunate, and their fans are very understanding of that and very grateful of that. Liverpool, same. They weren't expecting it really this year, and they're excited about what's kind of to come. They'll always be dickheads, obviously, but I think with Arsenal, it's like it's like with anything. You do these. Flav said, he was talking about Spurs, and he sort of, the mask slipped, and he went. I've been doing mental gymnastics with this team with Spurs for like 15 years, and I didn't have to do that anymore. We'd won. We'd actually won. And Arsenal fans, understandably, are trying to be sensible, mature, and patient. and they've got better and better and better. But at some point, it's like, come on, win.
That was part of your video where it says like winning trophies matters, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and it does, because I think from an Arsenal perspective, and again, I'm sorry for speaking out to them for their fan base, but like, you know, your team's good enough to do it. That's
it. I think that's it too. And do you know what I found myself getting when Palace won the FA Cup? I'm generally got this sort of well of like patience with QPR that like, if you're generally, you know, we've been a mess. Like if we are trying to like be smarter in how we're doing it, I've got patience. But I kind of looked at that and I was like, well, hang on, I'm getting old now.
Yeah,
like, hurry up.
And do you know, with obviously everything has to finish with QPR. How much of a difference is there between the teams of like Bristol City and QPR? Realistically,
not a huge amount.
That's what I mean.
Not a huge amount. I think some people think our squad's awful. Others.
But when you see them, when you see them compete against like any particular team, like sometimes it looks good, sometimes it looks indifferent, but they're not like miles away from anything.
No, but I tell you what, those teams that are bounce up and down, and they've got those Premier League squads. You look at the names, and
that's why I didn't even mention them. Yeah, that's why I didn't even mention them.
Yeah, but we did beat Leeds 4-0. That was a season and a half ago, but still. Anyway, Man City, I'm sure they'll be just fine. Okay, so don't worry, Man City fans. If you enjoy this podcast, please do follow the podcast and get involved in the comments. I love reading them. We also put the episodes on YouTube at different times as well, so make sure you subscribe to the More James Allcott channel, and just generally have a great day. Goodbye.